Okay, well, it is 8:30 on September 26th, and I'm going to call this Finance and Economic Development Committee meeting to order. For the note, Councilmember Greenstein is out of town and excused today. And with that, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda as published.
And I'll second it. Any discussion, any changes? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. We have an agenda. First up on our agenda is our revenue estimates and preliminary expenditures discussion. Troy.
Morning. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As become customary, we come before this committee and share our preliminary revenues and expenditures during the month of September. Just a sec for the share screen. Sorry about that. So we'll really focus the comments today and information on the general fund, which of course provides the services to the citizens I think they most identify with. But we'll have a little bit of discussion about utilities as well. Just want to really remind the committee, what we were expecting in terms of going into the 2024 budget. Each year, the city manager sends out a budget message in the months of May or June. This year it went out in June. And you can see here a couple highlights from that budget message. A bit of uncertainty in terms of rising interest rates, inverted yield curve, recession discussions. So really the focus and the message was that we needed to really look at our long-term sustainability in terms of each budget request received, just because of the uncertainty we were expecting throughout 2024. And I would say even now, 3 months later, we're really faced with the same level of uncertainty going forward. So looking right at the estimates, we'll really focus the conversation on our major sources of revenue. So for 2024 sales tax, we are projecting $17.1 million. This is about $1.2 million higher than 2023. This is more related to what we're seeing in terms of actual collections versus any prediction of increased sales tax. So it's really catching up with what we're seeing in terms of our conservative approach and projections for this year. As it stands right now, that 17.1 million is about 28% of all general fund revenues. Historically, this has been in the low 20s, but we also haven't balanced our budget with ending cash yet. So I do expect that percentage to come down, but this is the single most significant source of revenue for the general fund. You just saw yesterday or maybe Sunday, the July results of sales tax collections. So looking at very broad categories. So overall retail trade, looking at the last 12 months up until July of this year, our retail trade is down 3.6%. Construction as a whole is up 5.1%. A comment on that retail trade, you noted from my narrative in the message that, or in the last couple of months actually, that we had a very significant one-time sales tax remittance last year. So that's really kind of impacting the numbers. It was that significant, but retail trade is still down overall, but not quite to this extent because of that one-time impact.
What would it be? What would it be if we took out that impact?
Less than 0.5% decrease. I actually didn't calculate it for July, but June it was about 0.5%.
Okay.
When you take out that impact. I'm looking at year to date, so just looking at the 7 months of 2023, retail trade is down 5.1% and construction is up 2.1%. So you could see that when we go back to the last half of 2022, we were still, in terms of retail trade, still having increases. So, but you could see that the more recent activity is definitely lower than last year's. But that's all to say, I still think that sales tax is going to be at this higher level. Not really expecting any growth. As you've seen throughout this year, we've had ups and downs in terms of sales tax throughout the year. I think that will continue going forward, but you know, again, we're expecting about a 1.2% or $1.2 million increase in terms of the projection. So
when you consider retail trade, are you including the categories that are online purchases?
that's correct. So retail trade, this is by far the single largest category. It's might be 3 times as high as the second place source, but yeah, anything brick and mortar online sales, it's a very, very broad category.
Okay.
Property tax, we are projecting about 8.7 million next year. This is a $202,000 increase compared to the 2022 property tax levy. The facts behind the increase, we have a very preliminary new construction number of just under 180 million. This number will change probably about 5 times before November when the council actually considers the adoption of the property tax levy, but it's probably not going to change a whole lot, but I know this number will move. In comparison to this year's tax levy, a pretty big decrease in terms of that construction and annexation number. So in 2023, we added about 382 million in terms of new construction and annexation. So, you know, a little bit less than half of what we experienced this year. The $8.7 million projected property tax levy does assume the 1% increase. I don't believe the Q3 implicit price inflator has been released yet. It's supposed to be released on the 25th of September. I couldn't find it yesterday, so I'll look again, but we're pretty confident that that factor will be above 1%. So as a reminder, we are limited to 1% or this inflation number, whichever is less, but we do anticipate that it will be higher than the 1%. Some of our other revenue sources, utility tax, this is actually larger than property tax. We're projecting a $9.8 million increase for this overall category. It's about 10.2% of an increase. Leading the way to the increase is the projection for city-owned utilities. We, of course, are assuming rate increases for each of those utilities, electricity, natural gas as well, contributing to that increase. The way I project this is I look at, you know, where we're at in the year as the trend analysis portion of that, add in population growth as well as known rate increases.
Does this also include the new projects that they'll be coming online by the end of the year?
That's within the population growth, but I'm using actually the 2022 to 2023 population growth. So there's a year lag in terms of, you know, what you're referring to. So this will include, you know, the growth really happened.
But Troy, didn't we just hear recently that we're already meeting our 2035 population projection?
Right. So it's just a function of percentage. So, you know, we went from, you know, 58,180 to 59,430 or somewhere in that range.
Okay.
It's really that delta that's
okay. So you're not using the TRPC projected population growth, you're using actuals.
Right. I'm using the official financial management number. Got it.
Okay. And you're right, there's always a lag there too, but
right, exactly. Business and occupation tax, 3.5 million as in terms of the total. We really moved this number by the same percentages as sales tax, and we also look at the trend as well. So this is about a $428,000 increase compared to this year's budget. What is different in B&O tax, and we've discussed this at this committee, is what we think is happening is the service industry is really driving the additional change in B&O tax, just because for the most part, services are not sales tax
Right.
applicable, so. Emissions tax, we're projecting 180,000 for next year. This is a $12,000 increase. I think we talked about this as well at the mid-year report. This is one of the few areas of our local economy that have not returned to the pre-pandemic levels, and we actually don't think it will. You think about how much has changed in the last 3 years in terms of how we're getting our entertainment, think streaming and online services. And I think, the pandemic really changed some of those behaviors. So we'll continue to watch this, but it has been growing, slowly but surely, but it's still nowhere near the pre-pandemic levels. Gambling tax, this one is certainly an area that has returned and then some from the pre-pandemic level. So we're projecting just under 541,000 from total gambling taxes. This is an increase of about 137,000. So yeah, this is kind of a little bright spot within our local economy.
Would that be a record?
I believe it would be. I mean, didn't exactly verify that, but yeah, this is up pretty significantly.
And all that's from that one facility in Hawks Prairie.
That's correct. Parks and recreation fees, we're projecting $853,000 in recreation fees. This is getting close to the pre-pandemic level. You can see the metrics there for the collections through August 2023. We're just under 547,000. This is faster than last year, but still behind the August 2019 fee collection of just under 723,000. But we're just about there in terms of recovery.
Our Parks and Rec fees are comparable to the other Parks and Rec fees in the other jurisdictions.
It's been a little while since we've done that comparison, but I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I mean, we are in competition, so to speak, with our neighboring jurisdictions, and there are a lot of choices for entertainment and recreation. So that certainly is a big factor in terms of determining those rates. Investment and interest income, very significant increase projected. Where total projection is about $1.6 million. This is almost double what we projected for this year. But it makes sense when you just look at the rates.
Yeah.
We've had historic rate increases to the overnight rate. We're also in the process of basically turning over our long-term investments. And you've seen that in the investment reports throughout the years. So certainly significant increases here. And the challenge here is to try to figure out what's going to happen, in the economy in the next year. At this point, the Federal Reserve just signaled last week that they expect high rates through 24 and 25, as well as an additional rate increase before the end of this year. So despite what I would say good economic news, the Federal Reserve is definitely holding strong to its goal to bring down inflation to that 2% target. So pretty confident that these rates will continue through, the better half of 2024. So switching over to utility rates, what you're seeing here on the screen are the annual increases that were calculated by the city's rate consultant. For water, it's 5.25% for the years. The study actually covered the years 2022 through 2027. For sewer, it's 9.5% per year for the same period. And then stormwater, it's 4.5% for through 2025. And those were for stormwater, that was the rate that was included in the comp plan that the council adopted in 2020. But I do go, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment on this. When the when we originally looked at this and we hired the consultant, the one thing the biggest change that's happened during this time is our population growth. Our population has grown significantly more than what we realized, and we also have included some annexations in there as well. Although I guess the annexations in some cases doesn't really change much. We actually lose some money off of our water rates when that happens, if we've been providing water to them in the past. But our population increase has grown significantly. So I'm very curious of how much we brought in reality compared to what the consultant said we were going to bring in, just to have a check-in to see where we're at, and if this annual increases, if we're actually bringing in more revenue than what the consultant said we were going to bring in, it should affect what our rate should be.
Right, that's a good question. I'll answer it by not answering your question directly.
Okay.
We'll look at so I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I will say you're probably correct that the revenues that have been collected do exceed what was in those rate models, but there are a couple points I'd like to make. One is inflation has been really impacting these utilities more than I would say that a normal citizen would face. The inflation related to construction is far higher than the overall inflation rate. The other way I'll answer this is we will be issuing debt in water next year. We're fortunate enough to be awarded $10 million from the Public Works Board for a couple PH projects in water. That's going to be a $10 million loan. The really fortunate part is that interest rate is going to be, I think, about 1.7%, so far below market. But we will be issuing debt, and that is an indication that we don't have enough money to pay for our projects. So, I hope that kind of answers your question, Mr. Mayor. But we can certainly provide that information to you in terms of, what the actuals look like compared to what was in the rate models.
Weren't we sort of expecting to be issuing debt even with the rates?
That's correct. We were actually 3 times for water and sewer. So the good news in terms of collecting more revenue than we expected is less debt issued, which means less interest paid, which means overall savings for all of the ratepayers. So I don't see that as a downside at all. So the $10 million is far less than, and actually later, it's smaller in scope as well as later in the timeline. So that's just, to me, all good news in terms of interest savings for the ratepayer. But you're right. I mean, we have seen growth higher than what was in the model. As you know, we use a very conservative growth rate within that model. So we certainly have exceeded that for sure.
Scott.
And Scott Ager has a comment.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, in addition to what Troy said about the hyperinflation that you're all aware of, additionally, with all this growth, which is a good thing, all these multifamily also requires more work, more labor, more equipment. So we're in need of another Vector truck, which is a $750,000 piece of equipment, and another Vector crew, which is 2 more people. So even though, like I said, growth is good and it brings more rates, it also, those additional rates pay for the additional service that's required. So just wanted to add that point in there as well.
How many
Okay,
units
thank you for that.
by the end of the year?
What's up?
How many units do we have coming online by the end of the year?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but we can get that. Last I looked, this is first quarter of this year, I think we were running around pipeline about 1,800 units total in pipeline. I don't know how many are due to come be opened up and occupied by this year.
Okay.
But the other thing too is on some of those population estimates that you mentioned, going back to the 2025 estimates. Again, the rate studies and the work on the water plans came in after that, and so they're already seeing that rate or the population trends change, and a lot of TRPC numbers are based on past trends and land availability. And so what they couldn't quantify was the rate of infill development that we've been seeing, the multifamily, we've been telling them this is what we're going to see trending forward. But they base those population projections are fairly low, and they're based off of available land and past trends. Construction.
I'm pretty sure I mentioned that at the time, but that's, I'm just checking back in.
Yeah, I just want to kind of put that on, when we say we burned through the population projections, they're actually, in my mind, and I made those comments at the time, were artificially low.
I did too.
I would like to, hopefully the committee will humor me. I'd like to present some points on why it might be beneficial to look at multi-year rates again. You know, I know, Mr. Mayor, you have pretty strong feelings about committing future councils, but maybe I could convince you a little bit to think the other way. So in terms of multi-year rates, there's a lot of reasons I think it's beneficial. One is looking at the overall financial health of the utilities. This year or next year is a really good example. So again, we're going to be issuing debt next year. We're also going to be bringing cash. You know, if we spend everything we think we will, we'll be bringing cash down to a very low level. And we have the cash. I mean, obviously, we're not going to propose a budget to the council that is not balanced, but I think about the recovery in the following year. So in 2025, we're going to also have, you know, significant capital, I assume. But that cash flow recovery is a little bit unknown. Now, I know, you know, the council has supported these rate increases, but in terms of knowing that for sure within our LMC and multi-year rates being adopted, that would give us a lot more confidence knowing and being able to plan out into those future years in terms of that, the ebb and flow of that cash flow. Multi-year rates also provide predictability and stability for everybody involved. So our customers will know what those rate increases are going forward, as well as staff in terms of planning for those M&O increases that we might have, as well as the construction programs. We get calls pretty frequently about this time of year from our HOAs and our bigger customers because they're putting their budgets together at the same time we are. We of course give them what we think is the predicted rate increase, but you know, it would be again a little bit of stronger message to those bigger, larger customers about what those rate increases, you know, are if they are truly adopted. There's efficiency and cost. Every time we have to relook at rates, that takes staff time. Sometimes it takes the time of our consultants, which results in consultant fees. It gives us a better chance of accomplishing the objectives that are identified in our comp plans. I do have a couple slides in support of this to follow. Helps us maintain our bond covenants within our rate ordinances to maintain the minimum required debt ratios. Just knowing what that cash flow and what those revenues are coming in. But then it improves the overall rated agency outlook for our utilities. And I have some slides for that too. So this is a screenshot right out of our adopted stormwater comp plan. You can see the highlighted piece there at the bottom, the last bullet. Really what a comp plan is, it identifies all the objectives and the requirements for the utility and provides the financial plan in order to pay for all that. And that comes in the form of long-term rates or multi-year rates increases. This is a little snapshot right out of our most recent full bond rating from Standard & Poor's for our water and sewer funds. You can see highlighted there, they noted back in 2012, when they put out this rating, that they could take positive action if the city council adopted multi-year rates and you know, with the impact of actually helping us accomplish our financial plan. We did have a Standard & Poor's rating review in 2019. You could see here highlighted, they did note that we did have a multi-year water rate schedule adopted from 2013 through 2017. But you could also see in the same paragraph there at the bottom that, you know, they understand that we don't, at that time, did not have multi-year rates, and we were certainly looking towards getting to that goal. Continuing with the 2019 review from S&P. This was a relatively new assessment back in 2019. It was an operational management assessment. This is a assessment that's scored on a 6-point scale, with 1 being the best and 6 being the worst. We got a 3 back in 2019. You can see they noted that, you know, we got positive points for having a water shortage response plan. They did note that we didn't have a long-term succession plan for key staff. They also noted that we didn't have updated comp plans. And they also noted that we didn't have a current rate study at that time. So, you know, this, I think, is in support of terms of looking forward to future debt for these utilities. I think the multi-year rate conversation is going to come up again, and, you know, we could do ourselves a little bit of a favor if we did have multi-year rates adopted. So that's kind of a question I would like the committee to ponder and give us a little bit of guidance in terms of what you would like to see going forward with the full council before we adopt rates in November. Any questions on that before I move on to expenditures?
Now, just a comment. We always have issues when we bring this to council. You guys know that. And so it probably won't be that easy of a pass. I'll give it consideration in terms of support, but I don't. Whenever we come to this, it seems to be, you know, not only are we committing future councils to something, but at the same time, you know, the projections oftentimes have variables that just aren't there and that we can't account for. And then we fast forward a year or two and we see that, you know, we couldn't account for those variables, and those variables are now, you know, impacting what we thought or what the consultant said or whatever. And so it's one of those, it's almost, I won't say too fluid to do that kind of a thing. It's not, but it always comes back. It has some, we always agree.
I'll just say, I obviously understand the wisdom of a multi-year rate. I totally get it. The only thing I'm starting to worry about a little bit is, you know, are we getting to a point where part of our population is unable to afford these rates? And I'm not sure what we do about that. You know, I'm not sure, you know, maybe we need to go over, you know, senior discount. Do we have a senior discount?
There's a low-income senior and a low-income disability discount currently.
Okay, well, I think maybe we need to talk about those a little bit as we are looking at these rates and advertise that. I mean, I just want to make sure that, you know, obviously inflation is affecting a lot of people, but it's affecting some people more than others. And I just don't want to put, you know, those people in a situation where, you know, they can't afford their utility bill. So, you know, I know we have some programs out there. I don't know how well they're being used, how well they're being advertised, so on and so forth. So I feel a lot more comfortable, you know, looking at multi-year rates. If we also had another program that was continuing to let people know, you know, about some of our programs out there to help them. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Is it also possible to see if there's a correlation between rate increase and delinquencies? We get a lot of delinquency. Anyway, if there is a correlation between the two.
we can try to pull what information we have, but right now it's a very difficult time because we don't have a lot of normal coming out of the pandemic. We had a lot of you know, lack of payment during the pandemic. You had the moratoriums on payments. There's a lot of different factors that came out of that. And plus through the delinquency process, we found quite a few people that was not monitoring their automatic payments. They had the ability and will to pay, but they weren't tracking their monthly expenses. So there's a whole lot of variables that are gone into this most recent utility account delinquency and catch up that we started last July. So we're looking at having that figured out by the time January comes around, what that normal is, be able to say how many are really truly having struggles for payment and how many are actually have the ability but not making those payments because of something going on with their automatic payment system.
I mean, as we know, people are hyper focused on property taxes, and they always point to look at property taxes. You're pricing people out of their homes. Well, our utility taxes that go up every year far exceed the average increase in property tax. And so, we're talking about real life expenses here. So if we're going to be that cognizant of our property tax and its effects, we should be equally as cognizant about our utility tax.
Your utility rates. And
Utility rates, you're right. Same thing. Same. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's an increase in increase in costs for our residents.
that is something that still I would need to be cognizant of and monitoring, but you also having to realize that as the growth of the system and costs, as Scott mentioned earlier, there's still a service to be provided out there too, and that quality and level of service, what that standard is. And then of course, as we go out for debt, the people that are issuing debt are looking at what is the consistency and predictability in order to issue that debt, how minimizes the bunch of different.
I totally understand that. Just making a comment.
Thank you. Switching to the other side of our budget, expenditures. We'll really kind of talk about, broadly what we're seeing and what we're expecting in terms of expenditures. 2/3 of our general fund budget is salaries and benefits. You saw this during the mid-year report, but here are the impacts of increases to salaries per each 1% of increase. So within the general fund, salaries and benefits, a 1% increase is about $362,000. Looking at the total budget, which would include utilities, our internal service funds, that goes up a little bit, but still significant increases for every 1% of increase. So again, looking at salaries and wages, what we know currently or where we're at in terms of our labor contracts, our ASME contract, which covers the most employees in terms of number of FTEs. This is a contract that is good through the end of next year, so we know exactly what's going to happen for 2024. You can see for 2024, it's a percentage of inflation with a minimum and maximum. Inflation at the mid-year first half was almost 6.6, which means we're going to be at that maximum 4.5% for ASME employees. Looking at the Police Officers Guild, which is our largest police union. This contract actually expires at the end of the year. We are currently in negotiations with the Guild, so we don't know exactly what we're going to see for 2024. But to give you a little bit of perspective, 2023 salary adjustment for police was 6% January 1 of this year and another 1% for July 1st. So essentially a 7% increase for this year. Looking at the Police Management Association contract, it is also good through next year. The contract provides for 4.5% salary increases for 2024. And then the Senior Police Management Association also expires at the end of the year, so it is not known at this time, but for 2023, this group got a 4% COLA increase. Looking at employee benefits, these are preliminary, but getting very close to adoption. Well, in the case of PERS and LEF, so very slight increases for PERS contributions. This is our pension contributions for the majority of our employees. Again, a very slight increase for law enforcement pension, so from 5.3 to 5.32%.
Troy, can you remind me of so it's 9.3 to 9.5% of what? Our
Gross salary,
gross salary. Okay, thank you.
and it's the same for LEF.
Yeah. So of our gross salary so is PERS just all that doesn't include the police officers though, right? It's just that set employees.
That's correct. So it's police officers and LEF and basically all other employees in PERS.
Okay.
For medical, it's the same for both Regions and Kaiser, between 4% and 7%. I believe the AWC Benefit Trust, they usually act the last week or vote on this the last week of September, so this number should be finalized by the end of the week. At this point, there's no increases projected for dental, no increases for vision coverage. This is hot off the press as of, I think, Friday or maybe Monday. Labor and Industries rate is going up by an average of 4.9%. Unfortunately for the city, we have, so within the L&I rates, there are probably 30 to 40 different worker categories, and each one has a different percentage and different rate. So while L&I has an overall 4.9% increase, the city is going to be looking at a 15% increase for police, 8% for administrative clerical employees, and a 7% increase for public works and parks employees. So quite a bit higher than that. I'll also point out that this rate is the way L&I rates are calculated. You use the rate of the individual work class times our overall experience rating. And I don't believe we know our experience rating yet. I will say that Lacey has historically had a more favorable rating. So hopefully that's the same for this year, and we won't quite see these quite as significant increases as what you're seeing here on screen. Talking about some of the significant initiatives that we're seeing for 2024. Of course, we have the police station. That's number one priority of the city and the council right now. The preliminary expenditure projection for the police station in 2024 is just over 29 million. We have a long list of vehicle and equipment replacements being proposed in the 24 budget. That's about a $2.3 million replacement list. Utilities, we kind of alluded to this in earlier conversations, but you look at the three utilities, that's about $57 million in expenditures for next year. Transportation, the project list is just under 20 million. Pretty significant projects in there, design of College and 16th, you have College Street extension, you have design of the 7th and College roundabout, 4th Avenue design as well. Also significant there is the Transportation Benefit District program. So that's embedded in that $19.8 million, about $4.6 million in overlay for next year. About $500,000 for sidewalk repairs and replacement next year.
Nice.
In terms of resources to get all of this work done, we have quite a few requests for additional employees, 24 in total that Rick is going to have to kind of analyze and make proposals to the council, but you can see a wide range of areas that need addressing. Again, 24 in total, about 18 of those are within the general fund, 6 in utilities. I think the most significant area that we need to analyze is police. I think there's 11 position requests within police, so a lot of work for our rookie city manager, but up to the task, I'm sure. So, you know, kind of in general, thinking about, you know, the budget and its shortfalls. We do have limited capacity in terms of addressing all of the needs and requests. Certainly won't be any judgments on our departments in terms of identifying the needs. I think they're all 100% needed, but we do have limited capacity in terms of financial ability to pay for that. You know, in the budget message that went out, we really focused on, you know, maintaining what we have and trying to accomplish the current initiatives. And I think a lot of those will carry over into 2024. So the balancing effort, you know, where we're at right now, which is we haven't included any of those requests yet. Rick and I will roll up our sleeves this week. In fact, we'll be spending a lot of time together this week trying to get through all of those requests and trying to decide what we can move forward to the council. But basically just carrying over what we have and the things that, what I like to say is a city manager can't say no to. We have an expenditure level that's just slightly above projected revenues, so it's about $100,000. So we, you know, we're pretty sure we're going to have to use some form of reserves to balance this budget. Which, oops, I should have advanced the slide, but you know, again, I think we will be using some form of, you know, reserves to balance this budget again. So in terms of identifying those reserves for the committee, 2 significant reserves that the council had the foresight in planning for the future. Well, it's probably 3 years ago now, is police succession planning. You know, that was a $2.5 million reserve in terms of understanding where we were at in terms of our demographics within our police department. So this was a program that originally brought on 3 additional officers to help us get through that period of being down officers, because getting an officer through the academy is about a 9-month process, maybe 12 months, depending on when we actually get those officers into the academy. So we didn't want to have long periods of time where we were short officers. So that was I believe a 5-year program to get us through that period. We also identified a reserve for the mobile outreach team in terms of social services. So these are the balances remaining in those 2 reserves. The mobile outreach team reserve will be depleted about first quarter of next year. That's a service that costs us about $200,000 per year. So that's only about 1/4 of that. Succession planning, we've been using $750,000 in reserves for that per year. We do have a long list of repair reserves, replacement reserves, and parks reserves that we'll be looking at in terms of those requests that came in from our departments. So in terms of budget outlook, you know, I'm probably sounding like a broken record, but you know, we really want to make sure that what we have in the budget is sustainable for the long term. Construction has been at a high level for 2017, so 6 years now. You know, we know we're going to reach full build out sooner than later. It's hard to believe that we're talking about sooner than later. It wasn't that long ago we saw this as a long-term issue, but we're getting close to that, I believe. And we also have to just keep remembering that the Federal Reserve is trying to slow down the economy still. Comments from the chair just last Wednesday confirmed the fact that they are going to continue to try to slow down this economy. So that is still certainly a factor we need to keep in mind. Expenditures, you know, we talked about the impacts of labor. 2/3 of our general fund budget is labor. I know this council has said publicly before, this is our most important asset, but it's also our most expensive asset. Inflation uncertainty, Inflation is certainly coming down, but we haven't met the Federal Reserve target of 2%. And again, they came out just last week and confirmed the fact they are going to continue to try to reach that goal. We are still continuing to be faced with labor and supply chain challenges. It's definitely gotten better, but we're still being faced with that. It seems like every project we have has a supply chain issue. This is kind of a fact now. I hope that's not the new norm by any means, but we certainly are facing those challenges. On the labor side, we still continue to have a high level of vacancies, so there's still a lot of turnover happening within the city. So, you know, those are obviously issues that we have to deal with. Our production goes down during those periods as we bring the new folks up to speed. So, you know, definitely going to continue here for the short term.
I have a question about that. So when we budget, do we budget for the 382 employees that which is our capacity, or do we budget for the 90% of that?
You know, we budget for the full.
Budget for the 100%, even though 10% of it doesn't get used.
Well, it's
What do we do?
it's a moving number. I would not recommend budgeting for less than what we would be committed to, and I would say the same thing for contracts and, you know, any issue. It's, you know, budget for the absolute worst case scenario. But you are correct. We should expect some level of vacancies throughout the year, but I would not recommend budgeting less for that. And I'll give you an example from my past life. A city not to be named. The policy, because labor was budgeted so close, when we had a person retire, we weren't allowed to fill positions until that vacation payout was absorbed into the budget. So this was a city that had much higher vacation accruals allowed than we do. There was times we had to wait 3 months to fill a position. So 3 months had to pass and then we started recruitment. So there was oftentimes a 6-month lag in between filling positions. And my personal preference is to never have that happen again. That's very devastating for our workforce and, you know, what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that we, you know, trim it down to the bone. I was just wondering what happens if, you know, because we have this overage, because we are doing 100%, and then what do we do with the overage? Do we just stack it?
It's reserves. That's why we have so much in reserves.
Yeah, that's okay. That answers.
There's
I
also,
mean, when's the last time we've been at full employment? Have we ever been?
Yeah, there was years, you know, you talk, if you look at the period, you know, after the Great Recession and that no growth period up to 2015, so 2009 to 2015, we certainly weren't full, or there was times we were full, but even those times you have a vacancy here and there, but we spent a long period of time where there was very little turnover. I mean, think about people that are voluntarily quitting their jobs now because they're very confident they get a job somewhere else, but that didn't happen for a long period and a very recent period. So
So for the last 8 years, we've budgeted for 100%. We've spent 90, and we just put the reserves aside.
correct. In terms of where we're at exactly right now, like I said, you know, our expenditures are just slightly over our revenues. That does include the use of these reserves you're seeing here on screen. So there's $750,000 in police succession planning, the RAC support of $200,000 and the mobile outreach team. So those have been included within where we're at in terms of the snapshot in time. I will remind the committee that the succession planning use has grown. So that's actually funding 5 positions right now. So we basically have about 1.5 years worth of funding for those 5 positions, and we'll have to evaluate that in our 2025 budget. So that is the quick overview of where we're at. We are scheduled to have our full council budget workshop at your, I can't remember the days of the first meeting in October. So there'll be a work session to follow the full council meeting. And the reason we timed that is so we could get the budget document published the following week. We just want to make sure that the council, you know, the priorities and all that we're on the same page with the council. So
So can you go back one slide? So the mobile outreach team, and in this case, we would have to replenish those dollars. And I think the question is going to be, since we've, we're not seeing it as prevalent as we were in terms of the homelessness. Do you think that program will continue?
I believe it will.
I
In
think it
fact,
needs to.
Yes,
That's one of the challenges when we haven't using reserves to fund positions or contracts. Is once those reserves are depleted, then you have to reevaluate, do you shift more reserves over to them or trying to find other revenue sources? But the mobile outreach team is key in our homeless response because they're providing that crisis intervention and social service support that our community resource unit can't provide.
Yeah, I think it needs to continue as well. I was just hoping that that was the kind of outlook on it.
if we don't continue, I think it will take away our capacity from our police officers. That will just shift and, obviously we want to have our police performing.
Is that,
I definitely think we need to find a way to budget that long term. The mobile outreach team, community research, the whole three-legged prong, that approach that Lacey has needs to be part of our annual budget going forward. Not using reserves, but figure out a way that we can continue to have that as a part of a normal budget.
I think we're all on the same page on that one.
awesome.
I don't have any questions.
I don't either.
Obviously, we can move this on to full council for discussion at our budget workshop.
Okay, great, thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
Oh, one more topic.
Oh,
No.
let's stick around. Don't go anywhere, anybody.
Now we're about to talk about the city utility tax for water, right?
Yes, thank you. We would like the committee and hopefully the full council to consider rescinding a 6.04% utility tax on water. So to give a history, this goes back about 10 years. Well, actually, the Supreme Court decision goes back even further. So in 2008, the Washington Supreme Court ruled that fire hydrants, fire upsize of lines, and any maintenance related to fire suppression was the responsibility of the general government and not water utilities. So up to that point, water utilities were paying for all of that and passing on those costs to the ratepayers. So the state auditor's office gave a pretty big grace period in terms of implementing that, just because of understanding the challenge of moving those costs to general governments and redoing rates and all of that. So there was like I said, a long period that we didn't have to address the issue. But in 2025, when we were looking at our multi-year rate study and our water comp plan update, we had our rate consultant develop a allocation plan for fire protection services. And the result of that was, of the entire water budget, $504,000 of that was related directly to fire suppression. So that was equal to about 5.7% of all water expenditures at that time. So the council took actually two actions related to this to come into compliance with that ruling. The city council adopted an ordinance in 2012 that increased the utility tax by 6.04%, which generated to the dollar that same amount related to fire suppression within our water fund. And the idea was that we wanted a net neutral impact to both the general fund and the water utilities. So we're basically shifting the cost through this utility tax. So again, an increase to utility tax of just over 6%. At the same time, or the same evening, the council adopted water rates that included a decrease to the water rates by that same 504,000, but ended up being a different percentage just because of the netting of that utility tax. So the rate ordinance that year that increased water rates for the next 5 years also included a 5.39% decrease to water rates. And it ended up, again, a net zero impact to the general fund and the water fund. So right after we did that, the next legislative session, the legislature fixed that issue and adopted substitute House Bill 1512, which made it legal for water funds and water utilities to pay for those fire suppression services. Became effective in July of 2013. We at the time chose to do nothing with that because it was a net zero impact for one, and we had just adopted multi-year water rates, and we didn't want to go right back to that. And we still haven't until now is what we're proposing. So that's a little bit of the history. We would like to reverse that utility tax and water rate. And I'll walk you through what the impact looks like. And with the goal of having, again, a net zero impact to the general fund and water utilities. So what you're seeing is a breakout of, we'll call an average residential water bill with today's rates, both for the base rate and the volumetric charge. So to right now today, if a water customer used 900 cubic feet of water, with the two utility taxes on this utility, they would pay $45.18 on their water bill. So what we would like to do again is reverse. We basically want to go backwards from the action taken in 2012. So if we were to take the same fire suppression costs, 2023's cost, that's $950,667. So if we incorporate that back into the water rate, that would be an increase. So here you're seeing an increase both to the base rate and the volumetric rate, and that increase is about 5.7%. So instead of $4.32, the water rate itself would be $42.62. Our next step would be to apply the 6% rate. So 6% of $42.62 is $2.56. We would rescind the 6.04%, and your total would be $45.18. So again, a net zero impact, increase the water rate, eliminating the extra 6.04% utility tax rate. So in terms of what this looks like for 2024 potentially is we would increase the water rates to bring back the allowable hydrant and fire suppression costs back in the water as authorized by RCW. And we would rescind the special utility tax for water. So that would bring all utility rates across the board back to 6%. So, we would look for, some direction from this committee in terms of its preference. It would, since we no longer have to comply with the Lane versus Seattle decision, to me, it kind of makes sense to do this housekeeping change and bringing that utility tax, consistently across the board.
I mean, it's whatever is easiest for the city. I mean, it's a net neutral, so it doesn't really matter. If that's your recommendation, then I'll follow it. Right?
Yeah. It just kind of seems like we can't get it from here anymore, so we're gonna shift it over there and get it from you anyway.
Yeah, doesn't matter. It's a net neutral, so it's just that. Right? I mean, there's really no difference in the overall rate at the end of the day.
Correct.
Correct, but it also cleans the book so that it's part of the rate structure versus an additional tax that can have a different connotation to it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if that's your preference, then we should do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. With that, now we've reached the end of our agenda. Right, so without objection, I'll call this meeting adjourned. Thanks.